The morning unfolded in muted shades of gray. Clouds hung low, the kind that blurred the horizon and made even the streetlights look tired. Rain whispered against the concrete, soft but unrelenting, like the sky had been holding back tears all night and could no longer help itself. Nathan Cole stood at the edge of the sidewalk, waiting for a bus that was always late. He wore a threadbare hoodie under an old army green jacket that had seen better winters. His hands were stuffed deep in his pockets, more for habit than warmth. The wind found its way in anyway. He wasn't in a rush, not really. There was no promotion waiting, no meeting to miss. Just another shift at the hardware store, followed by another long walk home to his tiny basement apartment. The kind of place where the heat made more noise than warmth. But Nathan had learned not to expect too much from life. And somehow, that made the little things matter more. Like the way the coffee guy on 3rd Street always gave him a wink and a hang in there, or how the lady with the dachshund smiled at him every morning like they shared a secret. Nathan lived small, but he lived kindly. His world had gotten quieter over the years. Friends moved on, family drifted away. Time had this way of folding people into different corners. But Nathan remained, a constant in the background of a city too busy to notice. He looked down the street. No bus, just headlights smeared by mist, and the occasional cyclist hunched like a question mark. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, not out of impatience, but because standing still made the cold bite deeper. He checked his watch. Still early. Rain trickled off the edge of the shelter, forming a tiny stream that ran along the curb like it had somewhere important to be. Nathan followed its path with his eyes. Funny, he thought, how even water knew how to move forward. He pulled his hood up tighter, then looked up as footsteps approached. Slow, unsteady, hesitant. Someone else waiting for the bus? His eyes caught a figure rounding the corner. A woman, alone, with no umbrella. Her coat was soaked through, hair clinging to her face. She moved like the rain had weight, like it wasn't just falling on her, but pressing her down. Nathan straightened, just a little. Something in the air shifted. He didn't know it yet. But this morning, this quiet, gray, forgettable morning, was about to matter in ways he couldn't begin to imagine. She stopped a few feet away from him, not quite under the shelter, as if unsure she deserved to stand there. Water dripped from her sleeves, pooling silently at her feet. Her breaths came in short, shallow bursts, sharp intakes through lips that had lost their color to the cold. Nathan studied her quietly, not out of curiosity, but out of something more instinctive. Concern. The woman looked displaced, not just from the rain, but from the world around her, like she had stepped out of a different life and wasn't entirely sure how to re-enter it. She wrapped her arms around herself, pressing them tight against her chest, but it did little. The wind snuck in mercilessly, rattling her frame. Her shoes were delicate, heels meant for boardrooms or black cars, not sidewalks and storm drains. She didn't fit the scene. Not the point of the city, not the weather, not the moment. And yet, there she was. Nathan hesitated, then took half a step forward. She didn't look at him. Her eyes were fixed ahead, on nothing. Maybe on something only she could see. He opened his mouth, closed it. The moment didn't need words. Not yet. Emily Carr had made a decision that morning. One that didn't show on her face, but one that echoed in her body. She hadn't planned to come this way, hadn't meant to leave the house without her driver. But something inside her had buckled. A breaking point, quiet and invisible. The pressure of it all, the weight of leadership, of expectations, of always being right, always being composed. It had caved in. She'd walked out without thinking, wandered through the storm like a woman chasing the edge of something, maybe herself. And now she was here, standing next to a stranger who hadn't looked away like most would. A stranger whose silence didn't feel indifferent, but patient. Nathan noticed her hands trembling. Not dramatically, but enough. Enough to know she was cold to the bone. He shifted his weight again, uncertain. Then, with a quiet sigh, he shrugged off his jacket. It wasn't new, wasn't pretty, but it was warm. And it was the only one he had. He extended it toward her with both hands, still saying nothing, not wanting to startle her, not expecting anything back. Emily turned her head, slowly. Their eyes met, and in that 1 second, a second muffled by rain and wind and the absence of words, something passed between them. Not pity, not charity, just humanity. She stared at the coat, then at him. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. After a breath, she reached forward, took it gently, and wrapped it around herself like she was afraid it might disappear. Nathan gave a soft nod, barely noticeable. Neither of them spoke, but neither of them would ever forget. The coat swallowed her frame. It hung off her shoulders like borrowed armor, still holding the warmth of someone else's kindness. Emily pulled it tighter, pressing the fabric to her chest, letting it soak into her like something sacred. For the first time that morning, she felt something other than cold. The silence stretched between them, soft and unforced. Nathan didn't expect a thank you. He wasn't the kind of man who gave to be noticed. He simply couldn't stand watching someone suffer, not when he had even the smallest means to help. And so, he stood quietly beside her, rain dripping from the hood of his sweatshirt, now bare and damp, but somehow lighter. The bus arrived. Its brakes hissed like the city exhaling. The doors creaked open, but neither of them moved at first. The moment between them felt oddly suspended, fragile, like glass that hadn't shattered yet. Emily climbed aboard first. She turned once at the top of the steps and looked back. Nathan met her gaze. Again, no words, just a nod, the kind that says, "I see you," without needing to explain what that means. She sat by the window. He remained on the sidewalk. The bus pulled away. Nathan watched it vanish into the rain. He stuffed his hands back into his hoodie pockets, thin now, useless against the cold, and turned in the opposite direction, walking slowly back toward the crosswalk. He wasn't even sure why he didn't get on. Maybe he needed to keep that moment intact. Maybe, just for today, being late wasn't the worst thing. Emily stared at the passing streets, his coat still wrapped around her like a shield. She didn't try to remove it, didn't fold it neatly on her lap or treat it like a loan. She held it like it was hers, but not in the way people usually mean. Not possession, something deeper. Reverence. She thought of the meeting she'd skipped that morning, how no one would question it. She was the CEO. She didn't answer to anyone. And yet, she'd never felt so unraveled. Everything had started to feel like performance. Her power, her decisions, even her compassion. The higher she climbed, the less real it all felt. Success had brought distance. Prestige had turned her into a symbol. But symbols don't get cold. Symbols don't need saving. And yet, here she was. A man with nothing had given her more warmth in 5 minutes than most people with everything had given her in years. She glanced down at the coat's stitching, frayed at the cuffs, a small tear near the hem. Worn from life, not neglect. Like its owner. Like her. Now. Emily let her head rest gently against the window, feeling the city blur beside her. For a moment, she wasn't a leader, wasn't responsible for board meetings, quarterly earnings, or public appearances. She was just a woman, caught in the rain, saved by someone who didn't need to know her name to care. Somewhere in the back of her mind, a new thought stirred, quiet and steady. Maybe everything didn't have to go back to how it was. Maybe some moments weren't meant to be forgotten. And maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of something, but the beginning. Emily didn't return to the office that day. She rode the bus past her usual stop, past the towering glass structure that bore her company's name, past the places where her life had once made sense. Instead, she got off 4 blocks later, near a small park she hadn't visited in years. It was still raining, though softer now, more mist than downpour. She found a bench beneath a tree, sat down, and pulled Nathan's coat tighter. It still carried his scent, not cologne, just clean fabric, fresh rain, and something unmistakably human. Around her, the city carried on. Horns blared, people rushed with umbrellas overhead. No one noticed her sitting there, silent and still. And somehow, that anonymity felt like a gift. She didn't know his name, didn't know where he lived or what kind of life he returned to after giving her his only coat. But his face stayed with her. Calm, open, kind. It had been so long since someone looked at her without expectation, without calculation, without agenda. It haunted her in the most beautiful way. That evening, back at her high-rise apartment, Emily placed the coat over the back of a chair instead of her closet. She couldn't bring herself to fold it away. It felt wrong to hide it. Instead, she let it rest there, visible, present. In the days that followed, the rhythm of her routine returned, but something inside her refused to settle. Boardroom meetings blurred together. Presentations she once delivered with steel-edged precision now felt hollow. She caught herself staring out of windows, thinking of that morning, of the silence, of the weight of his gesture, of how her fingers had stopped trembling only once she wore his coat. And the questions began, not about business, but about herself. When did I stop seeing people? How long have I been moving without feeling? What did I lose while chasing everything? In subtle ways, her behavior changed. She lingered after meetings, listened more, interrupted less. At first, her team didn't know what to make of it, but they noticed. The stiffness in the air began to soften. She started walking to work on days when the weather allowed. Not to find him, though part of her wondered if she might, but because it grounded her, gave her time to breathe. And always, the coat remained. She brought it to the office once, draped it over the back of her leather chair in the corner of the room. No one asked about it. No one dared. But it became a silent fixture, like a reminder to her heart. Late one evening, after everyone had gone home, she sat in the dim light of her office and pulled out a notepad. At the top, she wrote, "Things that matter more than metrics." She stared at the words for a long time before beginning to write below them. Not business strategies, not goals, just names, stories, faces of people in her company, especially the quiet ones. The ones who never spoke unless spoken to. The ones who came early, left late, and lived lives invisible to the top floor. She thought of Nathan, and then she circled a name on the list. Paul Martinez, janitorial staff. Always smiled, barely spoke. She tore the paper from the pad and slid it into her briefcase. The echo of that morning hadn't faded. It had rooted. Something was beginning to grow. 2 weeks later, Emily walked into the Monday executive meeting with a paper folder instead of her tablet. Her heels clicked against the polished floor, but there was a softness in her face that hadn't been there before. The room stilled. Her leadership team, used to high-stakes announcements and fireproof confidence, straightened in their seats. No one knew what she was carrying, but everyone braced for the usual. Strategy shifts, quarterly reviews, maybe another acquisition. She sat, placed the folder on the table, and looked around. "I want to talk about people," she said. A beat of silence, then a few cautious nods. "I mean the ones we don't see. The ones who sweep the floors after we've left, who refill the coffee, clean the windows, process the invoices we never read." She opened the folder. Inside were stories, short bios, profiles, names, one-page snapshots of individuals across the company whose lives had been invisible to the upper levels. She slid a few pages forward. "This is Paul. He's worked here 9 years. Lost his wife last winter. He still shows up early every day." She paused. "I didn't know his name until last week." No one spoke. Some looked at each other, unsure if this was an indictment or an invitation. Emily exhaled softly. "I think we can do better. I want a new initiative. Not just charity, real change. Mentorships, job training, advancement pipelines for every department, especially for those who usually get overlooked." Someone finally raised a hand. "Is this PR?" "No," she said, her voice calm but firm. "It's personal." She didn't mention Nathan, didn't talk about the rain or the coat or the quiet man who gave without asking. But every word she spoke was born from that morning. Over the following weeks, the changes began. At first it was slow. A pilot program here, a new HR policy there. But it grew. People started listening, really listening. Mid-level managers found themselves mentoring junior staff they'd never spoken to. Internal promotions increased. The cafeteria now had an open lunch table where executives were encouraged to sit once a week. No laptops, no status symbols, just conversation. And Emily, she was different. Still driven, still sharp, but now something else. Reachable, human. Her office no longer felt like a fortress. Her doors stayed open more often than not. She smiled more, asked questions she actually waited to hear answered. And through it all, the coat remained. Sometimes on her chair, sometimes on her shoulders during late-night walks through the office when the halls were empty, and the city lights flickered across the windows. It was never mentioned, but it was never missed. The shift had started, and it wasn't policy. It was her. Friday evening. Emily sat on her living room couch, hair down, shoes off, a glass of wine untouched beside her. The city buzzed beyond her windows, but inside it was quiet. She flipped through channels absent-mindedly. The news droned in the background. Traffic, sports, a feel-good feature about a local charity drive. Just noise, really. Until a familiar street corner flashed on the screen. She blinked. It was him. Nathan. The segment was short, maybe 90 seconds, but it stopped her breath cold. The story was about a neighborhood initiative, a grassroots coat drive for the homeless. A reporter interviewed a few volunteers, and then the camera landed on him. His quiet eyes, the same hoodie, the same calm presence. He spoke softly. "I don't have a lot, but I've always believed that if you have something warm and someone else doesn't, you share." The words weren't grand, they didn't try to be, but to Emily, they rang with weight. He hadn't mentioned her, of course, didn't brag or tell the world what he'd done. But now, hearing his voice, seeing him again in this way, brought back everything. The cold, the silence, the moment when the coat left his hands and settled onto her shoulders like grace. The segment ended. The next story played, but Emily didn't move. She stared at the black screen after she turned the TV off, her reflection faint in the glass. Her heart beat louder than it should have. She didn't know why it shook her so much. Maybe it was the confirmation that he was real, that it hadn't been a dream or a break in her mind. Maybe it was how small his life looked from the outside, and how infinite it had felt in that one moment he'd looked at her and simply given. And suddenly, she knew. She didn't want to just be changed. She wanted to find him, not to return the coat, not out of obligation, but because there was more to say, more to understand, because something inside her had shifted that morning, and maybe, just maybe, he deserved to see the fruit of what he'd planted. She opened her laptop, pulled up the name of the charity mentioned in the broadcast, searched through their team page. No Nathan. She tried social media. Nothing definitive. But she saw one blurry photo. Group volunteers around a folding table, paper cups of coffee in hand, and there he was, smiling, in the back, a little out of focus. It was enough. She leaned back, staring at the screen. The search had begun, and for the first time in a long time, she wasn't chasing a goal. She was chasing a moment that had never stopped echoing. Spring had settled into the city. The rain still came, but softer now, gentler, like the world had exhaled and decided to start again. Emily stood at the edge of a conference stage, the quiet buzz of the crowd washing over her. It wasn't like before. She no longer spoke to impress. She spoke to connect. She adjusted the sleeves of the tan wool coat wrapped around her shoulders. It wasn't Nathan's. She'd never found him, not truly. Leads had gone cold, emails unanswered. But she'd bought one just like it. Same cut, same weight, same quiet comfort. And every time she wore it, she remembered. When the spotlight warmed her skin and the applause faded, she stepped forward and spoke not of profits or projections, but of people. Her words were measured, heartfelt. She talked about dignity, about the unseen, about how kindness doesn't need permission to act. Behind her, a slide appeared. Not a graph, not a slogan, but a single quote. Be the coat when someone's cold. She smiled, just slightly. Not everyone would understand. That was okay. Some stories were too soft to carry on the wind. They stayed where they belonged. In the hearts, they changed. Elsewhere, across the city, Nathan stood beneath a bridge with other volunteers, handing out coffee and coats to those who needed them most. His hoodie was still patched and worn, but now he layered it beneath a vest with the charity's logo. He didn't know what had become of the woman from the bus stop. Sometimes he wondered. Most of the time he didn't. The moment had been enough. He placed a coat around the shoulders of a shivering teenager and smiled. No speeches, no photos, just warmth, just care. The same kind he had offered months ago, when it had seemed like a small thing. It never had been. Somewhere, a woman wore a coat, not for cold, but for memory. Somewhere, a man kept giving without asking. They never spoke again, but some words don't need to be said. And some stories live best in the silence where they were born. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe for more meaningful content like this. Your support helps these stories reach more people who need them. And I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment below and let me know what part of the story resonated most with you. Your words matter here. Thanks for watching.